Hi, everybody. I guess I get the late afternoon, everybody's tired, and I was invited here to try to give the California perspective so you can see what the crazy Californians are up to. Los Angeles is, right dead center in this transformative change in California. Senator DeLeon, pro tem, comes from Los Angeles and put forth a bill, SB 100, which looked at going to 100% renewable by 2045. That bill did not pass, but some elements of it were interesting. The 100% renewable was based on customer sales. So it did not prevent gas generation from being utilized, which was one of our major concerns. It also allowed large hydro to count towards the 100% after 2030, and nuclear generation to count towards that 100% up until the point of 2047, when our last nuclear plant in California, which happens to be Palo Verde, which we're a part of, expires. That contract expires. So that was very cutting edge legislation. It did not go forward, but I expect that it will, probably not next year or the year after that. City of Los Angeles decided to support the bill, but it did not go through. Los Angeles LADWP, this is our resource stack here. We have lots of natural gas. Most of our natural gas is in our basin. 4 facilities that we have, 3 of which are along the coast. 1 is inland. And we also have a gas plant in southern Nevada. The hydro is made up of our Castaic pumped hydro facility, which is a 1,250 megawatt pumped hydro facility. We also have a share of the Hoover Dam, 491 megawatts, and the balance being small hydro on our aqueduct system on the eastern watershed of the Sierra Nevada range. We have 1,200 megawatts of coal. We did have another 470 megawatts of coal before 2016. We divested of our Navajo plant, so now we have our remaining facility. It's a 2 900 megawatt units. We have 1,200 megawatts of it currently. That's in Utah. We have 1,000 megawatts of wind. Most of that was procured prior to 2010. 170 megawatts of geothermal. Solar has really ramped up this last year. We've added close to 800 megawatts just this last year. And then, of course, our Palo Verde facility here that we have a share of. So this is our transmission and our resources. Currently, we have about 25% of the California state's transmission. It's outsized compared to the size of our system, which is about 10% of the California load. And we have 2 major DC, HVDC lines, one of which goes up to, that we share with other utilities, goes all the way up to the Columbia River Gorge. Up here we access low-cost hydro resources and wind projects up in this area. We have our Intermountain, on our STS HVDC line here. We have our Intermountain generating station here. We upgraded it in 2011 about 480 megawatts so we could bring some additional wind in here. So we have the Milford, 2 projects there, wind, and also a Pleasant Valley project in Wyoming that we get wind power from. This was our Navajo station that we divested of in 2016. Hoover Dam, Copper Mountain. This was our first large solar facility that we got experience from, 210 megawatts. And then we had the Moapa Solar, which is on the Indian Reservation, and that's 250 megawatts. Palo Verde is down here. Most of the power that flows from out of state flows through this path we call Victorville, LA line. And we are part of that path, and we share that with other utilities as well. And that is one of our major pathways bringing renewables into our system. We have some geothermal up here that ties into here, is delivered here to our balancing authority. So all of these points are part of our balancing authority here. We have our local generation here. So here's our facilities, the inland power plant, which is the valley in the northern part of our system. Then we have our harbor generating station down here in the LA Harbor area, Haynes Generating Station near Long Beach, California, and Scattergood here, which is about halfway up. Some of these older plants, Plant 1 and 2, were old aqueduct facilities, run-of-river types facilities, and then our Castaic Power Plant. Of course, we have our local solar, which is an important program locally. So we have a lot of assets, but the important point is we're a vertically integrated utility. So we're not part of the California ISO. We're independent from that. We're looking at joining as a participant in the EIM market, starting in about 2019. And we control our generation, our transmission, and our distribution system. And so all of these are part of that system here that we control. We have about 4 million residents in Los Angeles, about 1.4 million customers. About 200,000 of those customers are low-income customers, which have a subsidized rate of electricity. And we have lifeline customers that are, have health reasons that need electricity. So we have a large number of low-income customers. These are our major initiatives to reduce greenhouse gases. So we're doing all this renewable stuff really to reduce greenhouse gases. The SB 32 bill required GHG emissions to be below 40% by 2030. That's 40% of 1990 levels. Our renewable program, we're planning to reach 36% by 2020. The requirement is 33% currently. By 2030, we'll be reaching 55%, which is 5% more than the current SB 350 requires, which is 50% by 2030. And we decided for a stretch goal, aspirational goal of 65% renewable by 2036. And that was something that we self-imposed. We went out to our stakeholder community. We go through an IRP process every year, and we produce an IRP every year, and we go out to our stakeholders through an advisory committee and also a public outreach process that we do every other year. And we decided on a 65% RPS, primarily to reduce natural gas usage. I'll talk a lot about that in a little bit. Achieving 15% energy efficiency. The current law, AB 2021, sets a goal of 10%, so we're trying to increase above that. That's keeping a hold on keeping our load growth pretty steady. It'd be about 1.3 if we didn't percent a year growth if we didn't have energy efficiency. With the energy efficiency, we're looking at about 0.3% load growth. implementing hybrid energy projects. So this used to be our repowering projects that we were doing along our coast to comply with once-through cooling laws, regulations, which prevented us from using ocean water cooling without all these modifications. We decided to go just convert our entire fleet to dry cooling. We're now, the reason why we're calling it hybrid energy projects is we're now looking at combining large utility scale batteries together with the gas-fired generation. Electric vehicle expansion. So this is a big program of ours that we're looking at going to 580,000 vehicles by 2030. It's very aggressive. We see this as an excellent program to generate revenues and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the state. And of course, investing in our infrastructure, which through our power system reliability program, to basically create the robust distribution system that we need to support all of our distributed energy resources. So this is the resource mix, the transformation that we're going through. You can see here, we're 19%. We were just 39% 2 years ago. So now we're at 19%. We were at one time 55% years and years and years ago when we diversified our fuel mix, from the the response to the oil embargo and so forth, when most of our gas plants were run with diesel fuel. So we had a large coal. So this has been one of our major programs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. By 2020, we're currently at 29% renewable here, 34% gas. And I talked about the 55% and the 65% by 2036 here. Our goal is to reduce our gas usage. And so you can see with the increased renewables that we can get down to 21% of our resource mix with natural gas. The major laws that are affecting, driving all of this transformative change. AB 32 is the California Global Warming Solutions Act. It established a cap and trade program for emissions and credits. We've been participating in that, and if we got a free allocation of credits based on our projections back in 2010, if we fall below that, our allocation, then we have extra credits that we can then sell into the market. So the market-based program to reduce fossil greenhouse gas emissions. Currently, we're at 42% below 1990 levels here, and we're buying short-term credits. But now that we've divested of our coal-fired plants, we now have extra credits. SB 1368 prevents us from importing power outside of our system into California if it exceeds 1,100 pounds per megawatt hour of greenhouse gas emissions. That was the major reason why we had to divest of our coal-fired facilities. We decided to accelerate the replacement of those from 2027 for IPP to 2025, and from Navajo Generating Station 2019. Our contract ended in 2016. And then SB 350 here, we talked a little bit about. So that establishes the 50% RPS by 2030. SB 32, 40% below 1990 levels. We're at 42%, 14 years ahead of it. And this last one here, somewhat related to the SB 100, but our city council put forth a motion directing us to determine what investments would be necessary to get to 100% renewable, clean energy. And we formed a technical vision team this past year. We kicked off a major stakeholder process. Now we're involved with NREL in research projects and talks right now to look at 100%. So that's our long-term goal, is 100% renewable. California greenhouse gas emissions by each sector here. So in the electric sector, it only represents 19% of the greenhouse gases in the state. So AB 32 has a long-term goal of getting 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. 80% below. So be 20% of 1990 levels. You can't do that all through the electric sector, clearly. So we only represent 19%. And the idea in the state is that we would clean up our resource stack and then leverage electrification in other sectors to further reduce emissions, primarily in the transportation sector here, where we'd be using electric vehicles, and we could reduce a lot of the emissions here in the transportation sector. A lot of these other sectors are a lot more difficult to change, especially like industrial and so forth. But all of these sectors will have to contribute to that reduction. Here's our forecast using our production cost modeling that we do in our group. So we put a 20-year forecast of what our emissions would be. So we're currently right at this point here. This is after we divested of Navajo. And we also added a greenhouse gas adder to our cost, our dispatch of our generating units. So that lowered the capacity factor of our coal-fired plants relative to gas. And that resulted in a lot of this reduction here. And eventually, with increasing renewables and energy efficiency, we expect to get to 60% below by about 2026. And then 2036, we'd be at this level here. Now, the green portion here is the electrification, the additional benefits of using electricity to replace fossil fuel in vehicles. And that additional greenhouse gas reduction is here. So this is what we plan to help reduce these emissions, selling our electricity, and hopefully we'll get credit from California Air Resources Board for some of those emissions. This is our renewable energy breakdown, so 65% by 2036. SB 350 stops at about 50% here in 2030, so we're going beyond that point. And you can see we have a very diversified mix. We think this is very critical from an integration standpoint to have a very diversified renewable mix. And then also just having diversity in technological resources, technologies, and geographically having it dispersed over a wide area. Our solar programs, so we're looking at 4,000 megawatts of solar by 2036. Most of that is large-scale PPA projects that we're putting on our system. Our local solar here is a big contributor here. This is the DERs we were talking about earlier. 760 megawatts of customer net metered. We're currently at about 250 megawatts right now. So we have a ways to go, and it will allow the net metering to continue in the future. We don't see extremely high growth rates in net metered solar, primarily because our rates are low. They're among the lowest in the state of California. And also the fact that we're a very dense city environment, urban environment, and it's difficult. Most of our customers live in multifamily dwellings, so it's very difficult to put in net metered solar. We have a feed-in tariff program, so these are basically small PPAs within our territory. And we're looking at expanding that program. Right now it's about 14 cents that we're offering to our customers for that solar. So here's our Moapa facility here. This is a 250 megawatt project we completed several years ago. RE5 Solar, 60 megawatts. This is part of a larger group of facilities in the Barren Ridge area, and I'll show you in a minute here. But there's about 590 megawatts planned right there currently. This is the largest feed-in tariff project, we believe, in the world here. It's down in the harbor area. I believe it's 30 acres, and it's 15 megawatts AC, the Westmont Solar Project. And I think we offered 13.5 cents, I believe, for this one. So we've been studying renewable integration for years. In 2013, before we saw SB 350 coming out, we were starting to look at 33%, 40%, 50%, looking at those different levels of renewables and what the impact on our system would be from increasing penetration of renewables. And there was very little information out there at the time. There were some NREL studies out there that we took advantage of and started to learn from that. We also had a 50 megawatt facility. Data was very hard to come by, so we had a 50 megawatt facility, Copper Mountain 1, I believe it was, and we had a 50 megawatt facility to analyze the variations in that plant. What we came out was that a large facility plant, large solar plant greater than 50 megawatts is unlikely to experience a bigger than a 36 megawatt drop or variation in its output within 1 minute. That was kind of a key finding. We also, from the NREL studies, learned that if we spaced our facilities out more than 50 miles apart, about 50 miles apart or more, that they would have very little correlation between fluctuations in the output of those plants. We were concerned of having a whole lot of plants that all together would be creating a lot of variation in our system. Geographic diversity important, aggregated solar production. So we were looking at, if we put 4 facilities together, what would the variability be for 4 facilities versus 1 facility? And we discovered that basically it would be limited to about 2 large facilities, the variation. Not all 4 would be fluctuating at the same time. And then we need fast starting ramping generation. So we repowered 2 of our units with LMS 100s. We put 6 LMS 100s. After that, we did a subsequent repowering, put in 2 more LMS 100s. So we have 8 LMS 100s. Those are very quick starting, fast ramping combined combustion turbines. We also put in a combined cycle. It's very flexible, 1+1 unit. And we learned that our system regulation would grow from the current 25 megawatts to about 300 megawatts from that earlier study. We later followed up with a more detailed study so that was an hourly study. Then we started looking at a more detailed study, looking at sub-hourly, looking at the inertia on our system and the response on our system to see that it was we could go to higher levels of renewables without causing reliability issues. And we did find that there was much more fluctuation here in the middle of the day and from more solar primarily. This one here was at a 50% RPS, 40%, and 33% here. We found that our ramping rates would go from about 100 here to about 750 and onwards, depending on how much solar basically was put onto our system. in 2017. So we experienced a big drop in one of our facilities. Instead of spacing our facilities out 50 miles apart, we actually put 590 megawatts all in the same area. And so I kept pointing back to our early study and said, hey, this is going to be a problem. You know, you're going to lose 70% of that plant's output within 1 minute. And sure enough, it happened. We lost, in this example, we had been building out, this was Copper Mountain. We experienced this one, it was earlier, but recently we experienced about a 400 megawatt drop, and our operations became very alarmed with that. So we decided, operations decided to hold back 400 megawatts of flexibility reserves on our system so that they could respond to these disturbances. So together with the 400 megawatts of flexibility reserves, we think going forward we can handle just about any additional solar, since it's pretty much limited to a certain amount of variability. As you put more facilities online, it really doesn't get that much worse. And together with the RBC, so that's the reliability-based control standard that WEC has. How many of you utilize that on your system? Nobody? So what that is it allows us to, instead of doing the CPS, Control Performance Standard, they allow us some flexibility in the range of how we operate our ACE. Okay, so our area control error can vary between a band, and this allows us to lean on other balancing authorities within WEC and the WEC-wide area, so that if you have variations in your solar output, you don't necessarily have to follow that with additional regulation. So that really acts like regulation because it allows some variability there. So we get plus or minus 174 megawatts on our system. And what we found is that with RBC in place, we barely have to move our units. The only time we have to move our units is when it gets beyond 174 megawatts. And then it has to do that for 30 minutes. So we have 30 minutes to get it back down or below the limit. So we have to have this flexibility reserves together with the RBC. We can put units online, and then that band that we can operate within. So the ACE is, following around inside this band, and so we don't have to move our units. But then if it goes outside of it for more than 30 minutes, then we put on generation, and then we can operate within this area. And then if it drops, if the solar drops, then we can turn the units off and go like continue within that band. So that's been very helpful, taken away a lot of our concerns that we had in the very beginning years, where we felt like we had to have generation that just followed the solar profile, variation on a continual basis. So resource adequacy. So we discovered that the traditional approach that we were using, which was looking at the peak load during the day here, we were determining our dependable capacity, planning out into the future based on this peak load. With the solar coming online and the wind, we saw that it was slightly changing here, shifting over. Using our planning process, we were able to show that as in 2032, as we have more solar on our system, this net peak load shifts into the evening hours. So what we were planning for solar was about 27% dependable capacity for our solar plants. Once we started looking at it in this manner in the net peak situation, this is what our dispatchable generators have to respond to. When we looked at that, then solar really had no value, no capacity value. So that was a major change in how we determine our resource adequacy. This is going forward over the next 20 years, our dependable capacity breakdown here. So this is our peak load forecast plus the required reserves. So we're a balancing authority, so we have to have spin and non-spin as part of our contingency reserves. On top of that, we need to have replacement reserves, so we have to be able to back up the contingency reserves. After an hour. So on top of adding those two together is this top line here. Here's our capacity shortfall, so we monitor this over time. We're not too overly concerned about this here because load forecasts change, and so this might go away. We have a demand response is a big part of it, so that's 500 megawatts. So that's one of the programs that we're looking at how that develops and whether we can truly get 500 megawatts out of that program. Energy efficiency supplies a small amount. You heard about targeted energy efficiency. So we're looking at trying to develop, emphasize programs that can replace capacity during those peak hours in the evening time. Transmission upgrades. So one of the biggest challenges we're facing is upgrading our transmission lines to put all these renewables online. This was a major project here. We increased our capacity here to 2,200 megawatts from 450. This is one of the largest, I think it is the largest renewable, corridor, if you want to say that, in California. And it's right outside of Edwards Air Force Base here. You have the city of Mojave. Kern County is here, and Los Angeles County is here. So we built this Barron Ridge switching station. As soon as we built it, we had all of our queues for our transmission requests filled up immediately. We also built this new Haskell Canyon switching station down here. We reconductored, added new transmission lines. We upgraded the line from the Castaic power plant here. What we did not do in the first phase was we did not increase the capacity from this point to Los Angeles. So now we're in that process right now of upgrading those lines. So we have about 590 megawatts of solar. We have all within about a mile of each other up here near the Barron Ridge switching station. That's part of our Beacon Solar plant. So California requires that we report our energy storage targets. We decided to report, and one of the requirements was as cost-effective energy storage. So we determined that we could put on 154 megawatts of additional energy storage on top of what we have at Castaic, the 1250. And this would be primarily batteries on our system, our generation, transmission, distribution, customer system here. So these would be DERs here, our customer sites, distribution system here, also DERs. Here's one of our projects. So we just approved a 20 megawatt battery installation. This is a power battery that's tied to our system. It's not tied to the solar plant. And it will provide regulation services, load balancing, and so forth, system balancing, and so forth. And so that will help us stabilize that transmission corridor there. Here's a distribution station. So everybody hear about Aliso Canyon? Yeah, so Aliso Canyon was the largest methane leak. It just happened to occur in our backyard, so in our territory. Had largest methane leak, I think, in history. That created a real outcry from our public, our customers, to reduce our use of natural gas. One of the things that we did in response to that was we're developing at one of the distribution stations near that area where that leak occurred, we're putting in battery energy storage. We're also pausing our repowering plans because now people are questioning our customers and environmental groups, and our politicians are questioning, well, why are you repowering, putting in new gas-fired generation when you're putting in a lot more renewables? Do we need to continue to put this gas-fired generation in place? So now we're studying that, looking at power flow issues within our system, and looking to see if we can use DERs, distributed energy resources, to supply some of that replacement energy and capacity. We're also looking at batteries, so large 100 megawatt approximately batteries close to our generating stations. I was surprised that a 100 megawatt battery fits into about an acre and 3 stories, with the middle story being basically all the controls. So I was surprised that they could actually put it in such a small space. I thought before it would be, 10, 20 acres, something like that. But they're getting much more compact. So we're looking at that as possibly to replace some of our gas-fired generation. This is a small talk about resiliency on our system. So we're putting battery systems with some of our critical public safety facilities. Fire Station 28 here is one example. We're putting in a battery energy storage system there together with a rooftop solar. And that's a sort of a test case, and see if we can then do that on other city facilities as well. So 2018 and beyond, our big concern is minimizing curtailment of renewables. Originally, we thought curtailing renewables would be cost effective. Later, we through more analysis that we looked at it, not only you lose the energy from the PPA, so let's say you have a $40 solar, but then you have to replace that energy, and that's where it gets expensive. So we find that using battery energy storage co-located with the renewables, we can absorb most of that overgeneration that we would and curtailment that we would have to do on our system. We are also looking at optimizing tariffs and incentives for distributed energy resources and employing DER management systems to deploy these resources, and then increasing our energy trading between our balancing authorities, between California ISO and LADWP through the energy imbalance market, which is a 5-minute market, to better utilize our resources and take advantage of other opportunities in the market, and providing long-term duration energy storage. So we're looking seriously at a compressed air energy storage project near our IPP facility, our coal facility. It's a big salt dome, and they literally pump water in there and dissolve it, and it's a cavern. They create a cavern. It's about the size of the Empire State Building. Then they use a combustion turbine on the other side. So electric compressors compress the air into the cavern. It comes out of the cavern at high pressure, about 3,500 psi, goes through a gas turbine, and then produces electricity that way. So we're looking at a small project there, and also looking at possibilities of additional pumped hydro facilities. And we're looking at low and zero carbon dispatchable gas generation. So we're looking at, in the future, and this is a lot of the research that's going on, is trying to figure out if we can use hydrogen in our gas turbines and in place of natural gas. So here's our 100% energy goal. Here's our DERs here, contributing to that. Compressed energy storage from batteries will be a big component. And then we have our resources that we have currently. We'll be increasing that in the future. So our record peak day here. So we're having discussions with our major stakeholders, with environmental groups about, why do we need this gas-fired generation? So on a peak day here, we experienced a 6,500 megawatt peak day just this past August. And this was the breakdown. We had purchases here of about 854 megawatts of purchases that we made, and that was to basically dispatch or allow room on our generators to provide the needed reserves that we need for our balancing authority here. So that's the contingency reserves plus the replacement reserves. The natural gas dispatch was nearly maxed out. We think there's about 2,850 megawatts, and that net peak load occurred at hour 18 here. We had Castaic was pumping in the morning time here, and we released that hydro generation in the evening time here. And then our renewables was here. So on a peak summer day, it's very difficult to displace all of your natural gas. In the springtime, it's probably very possible. Wintertime, it's possible as long as you don't have big storms. But as you get to 100% renewable, you will have times where you'll have storms that come in for a week or two. And batteries just cannot store enough energy for that long of a period of time. So that's the big challenge, is in the summertime when you hit peak loads, and then during storm events. So we think that we definitely will need to have the majority of our natural gas available to us, whether we convert that to hydrogen or biogas or hydrogen with syngas. So that's basically putting in a diluent like nitrogen together with the hydrogen into these turbines. And they actually make turbines like this today, so it's not that unrealistic. So this is an example of when we hit 2036 and we hit an 8,000 megawatt load, which we're basically projecting from our modeling. This is what our gas capability would need to be here, 2,850, in order to meet our peak load. And this is with 404 megawatts of additional battery energy storage and our 500 megawatts of demand response here on our system. So even in that case, we still need that natural gas capability here, and that's maxed out at 2,850. So this is our resource timeline. This is our recommended case from our IRP. Next year we'll have another recommended case. We might be going to higher renewables. That'll be decided by the committees and by the public. They clearly want 100% renewable. They want no natural gas. So those are the issues that we're dealing with in California here, especially in Los Angeles, where we had the Aliso Canyon. We were impacted from that and the public perception of that. Any questions?
Yeah, you had mentioned that you found that curtailment wasn't a cost effective, that batteries was a cheaper option. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so what we're finding, and this is very, very, very recent, it actually was a surprise to me, but when my analyst showed me, said, look, it's more cost effective to put a 4-hour battery at more than 50% of the capacity, nameplate capacity of the solar project, and together it's more cost effective. There's a big savings in reducing curtailment to zero. You also have additional capacity that you have. So now the solar that had zero capacity in the middle, in the evening time, now has the full capacity value during that time. So that has additional value, which we consider. And the integration cost of having solar that's basically load shifted into a sort of a base load product from the daytime to about 4 hours into the evening, and you can actually extend that even longer at a lower capacity. You can extend it for 8, 16 hours, whatever you want to do. That has a low impact on our integration costs. So we're finding that solar plus large-scale batteries, that combination, taking advantage of the ITC credit, 30% currently. So we're over-complying with our renewables to take advantage of the ITC and going out there to secure those contracts. And they come in the form of a PPA. So basically all of the risk is placed on the developer. They take all the risk. We just pay the fixed price for that solar plus the batteries. So it's basically a firmed and shaped product coming to us. We think that's very cost effective.
So based on this discussion right here, so in general, and I'll defer to Dr. Doris, pump storage is, you really can't make a pencil out. But with the discussion you just entered in here with the batteries, have you looked at large-scale pump storage with respect to the same subject here you just discussed?
We haven't looked at. We are looking at it, but I don't have any findings to give you at this point. It is, it is probably more expensive, but you do have 48 hours of storage. At least with our Castaic plant, we can run it for 48 hours. So that's a lot of batteries. So we haven't done the analysis to compare that. So, but if you did an equivalency of a battery that could supply 48 hours worth of output, maybe it'd probably pencil out that the pump storage would be cost effective, but you typically don't need capacity for that length of time. So, and we're having this same issue with comparing geothermal resources, which basically are a base load resource, comparing that to solar. And so we don't really pick favorites. We don't look at one as being, we think that there's a good case for having a diversified renewable portfolio, especially as you go to 100% renewable. So if you want to displace that natural gas on your system, the only way you're going to do that is with base-loaded geothermal type of energy or long-duration battery energy storage, and that would take a long time before that becomes really cost-effective to do.
So you mentioned that you have to have something so when you have these large storms, long-duration storms come in. So what degree of the existing capacity do you have to have of the old units? So if you have a storm that takes place over 3 days.
Yeah. At this point, we think we need the full amount of gas-fired generation that we currently have. We probably don't have to build more gas-fired generation than we have planned in our IRP in the future, but we do need to have a sizable portion.
This may be unfair. It's just philosophical. So you can't ever get to 100%. Is that fair, or am I out to lunch?
If you could replace the natural gas with something that was carbon-free, you could probably get to 100%. Now, would that be expensive? Yes,
so
most
the next
likely.
Question is, you said that LA has some of the cheapest rates. How is that expected to go out as you start acquiring these additional resources?
Well, some of our internal analysis that we've done, the cost really doesn't get prohibitively expensive or really impact our rates, far beyond about 3% increase a year, until you get about 75% renewable. So once you start hitting 75%, now you have to go to more and more expensive measures to go even higher than that. So it's sort of a hockey stick. The cost goes way up. So that's part of the determining what investments we need to plan out in the future to try to avoid that hockey stick. You can certainly put in biogas, but biogas is about $34 a MMBTU in the future. So hydrogen is probably around that same price, and so we're looking at all those different options. But yeah, getting above 75% starts really impacting your rates. About 85%, it gets technologically difficult, extremely difficult to go beyond that point. But if you count it, it depends on how you count it. If you count it based on customer sales, that's different because we have 12% losses on our system. So if we can supply 12% of our generation from natural gas and 100% of our sales, that might be doable. And that's what SB 100 was considering.
So one of the major limiting factors in CAISO's energy balance market in the Pacific Northwest is available transmission capacity, available transfer capacity on the Coy at the Malin scheduling point. And so, if there are fire hoses in the desert Southwest for the EIM, there's a straw going north, and a lot of the Pacific Northwest utilities are looking at LADWP and the Pacific DC Intertie with curiosity in terms of LADWP's plan for rolling in Pacific DC Intertie transmission for the EIM. I know it's pretty early since y'all are joining in 2019, but do you have any insight in terms of LADWP plans for that transmission in the EIM?
Yeah, I can't speak to specific resources. It's for confidential, but we would ideally, select certain resources that we put into the market and reserve others. We justified all of these resources based on our native load, and so transmission, as you know, it will become more and more valuable, and so it's I don't have an answer for you honestly.
On one of the slides you had mentioned that you went, by adding the additional solar, you've gone from 25 to like 325 for the flexibility. Was that from the results that you saw with the solar drop, or was that from the study that you did?
That was originally we were looking at about 300 megawatts, from 25 to 300 megawatts, and that was the original study that we looked at. We looked at 4 200 megawatt facilities, so it was about 800 megawatts back at that time. And that's what we determined we would need as far as regulating reserves on our system. Since then, with RBC coming about, we found that we don't need to be chasing the solar. So we call it now flexibility reserves. They just need to be available within 30 minutes. We plan around 10 minutes because we're a lot more conservative. So basically we can just work together with RBC, together with flexibility reserves, sort of takes the place of a lot of that regulating need.
With the Olympic award in LA, are you finding any pressure to fast forward some of the renewables just for the press, to keep it, make it look like you're going faster than your original plan? Are you receiving any pressure, basically, from the Olympic Committee side?
Oh, because of the Olympics? I remember seeing something come across my desk, and it was like 200 megawatts they needed for the Olympics. And we basically put in our IRP, what our plans were, and I didn't sense any pressure from that. Other questions? Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.